Greetings everyone, it's been almost 2 months since we set up this beautiful, well, kind of beautiful, shallow South American Rio Negro style biotope aquarium. It's time for an update, and there are actually bad news and good news about this setup. Originally I planned it as a sort of a display tank in our living room, which will be which should have been a potentially striking setup with dense aquatic vegetation and dense riparian vegetation. So I'll start with bad news, and the main bad news is actually the tannins. Yes, I know I initially planned this setup as a blackwater community tank, Rio Negro South American community tank, and initially when we just set up this aquarium, I've added some botanicals. I've added some rooibos tea to have this black water effect, and then something different happened. I realized that there is something in this system that produces enormous amounts of tannins, and not the type of tannins that I want. I want this tank to have kind of a reddish, deep brownish, ruby colored water, which is what you would see in Rio Negro, in other blackwater habitats in South America. But instead there is something that has started producing this deep yellow and kind of dark sandy brown colors. Not transparent black water, because when we make a black water setup, the color of the water is reddish, it's brownish, and it's transparent, so you can actually see the fish inside. What happens here is I get tannins that make water murky, extremely murky, and yellowish, sandy brown, to the point that I can only see fish when they swim next to the glass, next to the viewing glass, as is the case here. You can see that the water is so murky that there's literally nothing that I can see deep inside this tank, and from the sides or from this side there's not much I can see. And I've tried to deal with this situation because I want to have a different black water effect, or for the very least I want to have clear water in order to create black water from clear water. So I've tried doing a massive 80% bi-weekly water changes on this tank, and I've kept on doing literally 2 water changes per week, 2 massive water changes per week every week since we set up this system, which is for more than a couple of months. It doesn't help. I've changed the water last time a few days ago, and you can see that it's still dark and it's still murky. I also tried adding activated carbon to canister filters. So I have 2 canister filters in here, and in both of them there's more than 1 kg of activated carbon, and I can tell you for sure that activated carbon does nothing to clear up the water, to remove the tannins. So I have 2 culprits. First are mesh bags with aquatic compost, which I have added to the bottom of this tank in order to create this nutritious substrate for aquatic plants. The second culprit are large pieces of oak bogwood, which are basically in the back. But the thing with oak bogwood, with oak driftwood, is that I have previously soaked them in water for I think almost 3 weeks, maybe for a month. They leached some tannins, but not much actually. So I don't think this is a bogwood that leaching all these tannins. So the only culprit are these mesh bags with aquatic compost, because such an incredible amount of tannins I've never seen before. And as I've told you, I'm doing massive water changes. So that makes me a bit disappointed, because my idea for this setup was kind of a ecosystem style biotope tank, like my previous project, where I would basically spend little time on maintenance, and the tank that would kind of take care of itself. So I would do maybe monthly water changes, replacing maybe like 10 or 20% of water, but definitely not 80% of water. And of course adding some water instead of the water that evaporates. So that was my idea for this setup, and that's clearly not working currently. It's a really high maintenance tank. I need to literally spend hours twice per week doing this massive water changes, and they get me absolutely nowhere. The other bad news are the riparian plants. They're not really growing. Well, I'll take you closer to show you each of these riparian plants, but overall I would expect quite a lot of growth of them over this period of time, but that's not the case. Well, I can guess that they don't get enough light, because most of these plants, they will basically exist and they will kind of survive if you don't provide them with lots of light. But if you want them to grow lush, if you want them to grow fast, they need tons of light. And the problem with this location, with this fish tank location, is that the plants up there, they don't get any daylight, so they have to rely on any extra lights, LED lights that I provide. And again, I didn't want to make holes in the ceiling or holes in the wall in order to attach any overhanging lights. So the lights are kind of in the back, and there is a couple of spotlights in here. And obviously that's not enough for this number of plants, and the large plants, they need a lot of light in order to thrive. So, and that's not a lot of light. So that's why I guess they're not growing, and they're just there, and some of them look kind of feeling sorry for themselves, others are more or less doing fine. So these are basically the bad news. Yeah, so you can see here that the dwarf such is kind of surviving on a margin. It's basically not doing very well. In terms of Echinodorus, this is Echinodorus polyfolius, and it's actually growing, so you can see some immersed growth. I can't even see the plant itself, it's kind of deep in there, but it's growing, and maybe it has a chance to survive. I don't know. When it comes to other Echinodorus plants, this is Echinodorus argentinensis, and it's kind of, yeah, there's probably some new fresh leaves, but very few of them. The rest, well, I have actually like 6 other Echinodorus polyfolius plants, and you can see some of them in here. They are not doing very well. This is pothos. Yeah, so in terms of aquatic plants, yeah, from when I film it from the top, you can see how dark the water is. It's just literally not possible to see anything from the top. In terms of riparian plants, this is a Philodendron micans, which is doing okay. Pothos is actually the only riparian plant that is thriving here. It's growing because it's right under this LED lamp in here, and this is Ficus pomelia, which is, well, kind of growing, mostly surviving. This is a money tree, which I've added recently, and it is not doing well. The fern, this is a Boston fern, also not doing well. There is almost no growth on it. Christmas moss, immersed Christmas moss. Well, not growing as good as it used to grow in my other setups, but kind of surviving. And here the same situation with Christmas moss. Anthurium in here, kind of surviving, and the same with Calathea and another money tree. They're not really growing well. What else? Basically, yeah, that's all about riparian plants, and they are looking quite sad. And considering the amount of time that I've had them in here, they are not looking healthy, and they're not growing well. Yes, the water lettuce is okay. It's actually growing quite nicely. The same goes for Hydrocotyla leocephala. There is quite a thick carpet of it up here, and bits and pieces of immersed growth, but other than that, not much. The other bad news is actually part of the first bad news, and it's kind of a vicious cycle. I've added these mesh bags with aquatic compost in order to facilitate the growth of these aquatic plants, of echinodorous plants and of dwarf such, in order to have this kind of harmonious transition from this coastal area aquatic plants, dense aquatic vegetation, to this upper part with riparian plants. But because the water is so dark, because the water is so murky, aquatic plants just cannot grow. Most of them are struggling and not growing, so it kind of defeats the purpose of having aquatic compost here, because the water is too dark for aquatic plants to grow. So now about good news. Actually, there are two good news. The first one is I have a lot of floating plants that are thriving. These are two species, basically Hydrocotyle and water lettuce pistia plants. They are doing really great. They grow really fast and grow really lush, and that's only good thing about plants. The other good news is fish. Fish seem to be doing great. I've seen some pencilfish breeding in here. I've seen Corydoras breeding in here. So they seem to be happy with this condition, although I'm not happy with the state of things. So with all of the above, I really don't know how to proceed further with this setup. I don't know whether I should keep on doing bi-weekly water changes, trying to remove all this horrible yellowish tannins, or should I break down the setup, remove the mesh bags, and try to do something else in this fish tank with a slightly different setup. So yeah, no idea how to proceed, because I'm a bit tired of doing massive water changes twice per week, and this is obviously not a discus tank and not something that I envisioned when I created this setup. And yeah, I'll appreciate your opinions and your take on this, because that's clearly not probably a healthy or viable setup.